Okay, Russell has already spoken about the learning journey of service children. I'm going to focus on a service-related lifestyle and the potential impact this may have on our children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. Think initially I'm going to mention that not all service children live within garrison towns or even are mobile alongside serving parents. Many families choose to serve unaccompanied, and therefore the serving parent may be absent from the home for significant periods of time. This doesn't remove challenges that the families may face, it just changes them. So please be aware of not assuming that all service children are constantly on the move. You will potentially also have children of veterans and reserves within your local area, and they can come from any of the services. So even if you don't have an Army, a Navy or an RAF footprint within your locality, you may still have service children and young people who have a relationship with the military in a slightly different capacity. That being said, we do know that the majority of service children are mobile, and this can bring some unique opportunities and challenges for our young people with special educational needs. I'm going to go through some of the aspects that we often hear reported to us, and we recognise within cases that we work on. So we see that frequent movement can result in a delay in needs being formally identified for our children and young people. As a former Senko, I appreciate that having time to develop effective relationships and also time to gather evidence of a graduated response to special educational needs is crucial, and that can be limited when a child is only in an area for a short period of time. This often leads to parental perception that children's needs are going unaddressed because a school or local authority knows that the child is going to be leaving the area on posting soon. The reverse of this is I've also witnessed where schools actually do their utmost to make sure children's needs are recorded accurately before they leave, and excellent transition packages. We also hear reported that the children and young people may find themselves repeatedly dropping to the bottom of agencies' waiting lists each time they move. We know that waiting lists can be a challenge for things like CAMS, speech and language therapy, OT, but if you feel that every 2 years you're never quite getting to the top of that, it can be a source of frustration for families, and they often feel that they're in a postcode lottery, which links with the next part about inconsistency in the type of provision to meet the needs of children each time a move occurs. We know no two schools are the same, no two local authorities do things exactly the same, but parents often view that as inconsistency, and because it's not the same as it was previously, which can cause anxiety. We also kind of need to consider the bigger movement, between UK nations or overseas. We know that each of the 4 countries within the UK has their own education system, and that policy and practices devolve to each of the 4 countries. And obviously overseas is completely different again. Russell said earlier about each of the states within the US having their own systems. Each of the countries can actually have very different offers to meet needs, and the processes required to get the provision can look very different, which can be challenging for families, because there's often a lot of jargon and educational specific vocabulary attached to those processes and systems. If we do have a child or young person who's been through statutory assessment in England, we know that as soon as that child no longer has an English address that the legal status of that plan lapses. This can sometimes cause a lot of concern for parents, because by this point they usually feel that they fought quite a long battle to achieve that EHCP. If you're moving between the devolved administrations, there's no statutory onus to convert one plan to the other, but it is recognised within the SEN codes of practice of the countries that there should be recognition of a child's previous journey, which is really useful for us. The last one is an interesting point around differences in cultural norms for supporting children with needs. So there's one example there of if you are in the US, it is more likely that you would receive medication for a diagnosis of ADHD than if you were in the UK. So you've got two very different setups, but the same child moving between them. And we shouldn't forget that we also have lots of service families who are non-UK families, and they also bring their own cultural norms to their perceptions of special educational needs and disabilities. And sometimes trying to get the right message to families relies on relationships that schools have with service families. The next task is in relation to the operational nitty-gritty, and we're going to look at some scenarios about what different characters within a service child's learning journey can do to try and influence positive outcomes for a child or young person. We've heard a lot about kind of high level things that people can do and how this will relate to this enormous body of service children. But we're going to look at two scenarios which pretty commonly occur and are based on real cases, and just see what part people can play to actually get things right for these kids. So I'm going to talk very briefly through a scenario, and I want you to choose one of the characters within the scenario. So we've got the child or young person themselves, we've got the parents, the family, we've got local authority staff, and then we've got the school staff as well. So I'm going to ask you to consider, as your character, how you feel within the scenario and what part you think you can play to influence moving things forward for this young person. And I'm going to talk about how the MOD agencies can potentially work with the other agencies and the family to achieve positive outcomes. So the first scenario refers to a young man named John. He's currently in S4. Completing his nationals in a specialist school in Scotland. John has autism spectrum disorder. He finds change and transition particularly difficult. John's father is in the RAF and is due to be posted to a semi-rural location at some point in the next academic year. John's mother is concerned that he won't cope well with moving during a phase of education, and she's also concerned about the availability of the specialist support he requires in the new location. So there's opportunities for this family, and there's some challenges that this family could face as well. Now, ideally, I'd like people to talk back to me at this point, but you're not there, so I will have to do all the talking for you. So, if we look at John in this scenario, John is potentially 15, 16. He's in his last year of secondary school in Scotland. He's completing qualifications that he could not access outside of a state school in Scotland, and he's having high levels of specialist support. I think it's pretty fair to say that John has very little influence over the movement of this family, and potentially where he's going to live and what the next stage of his education will potentially look like. There's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety, which any young person would find challenging, but a young person with ASD will potentially feel it a bit more acutely. We've got John's parents, John's dad, John's mum. There's a lot of anxiety for them as well. We often hear from the serving person that there's an element of guilt around, you know, this is what my job is putting our children, you know, putting my child into this position. And they don't often look at the opportunities, they focus on the challenges as well. John's mum is you know, looking at this quite practically. You know, what about a school, what about transport to get into school, what's there, what's available, you know. So the entire family, at the initial point of being told you are going to be moving or in free fall. So at this point, this is the point at which families usually reach out to see us, and we start to try and unpick how we can support them to move forward with this. So if we know where they're going, we start to support them with thinking about, well, what time can you move? What is available in the new location? Asking them to speak to the young person about what they would like to do in the next stage of their education. So as much as we don't suggest schools or colleges, we give families information with how to actually find that information and to make decisions for themselves. We know that in Scotland, to access a special school, a statutory assessment of SEN is not required. If it was considered that John would continue to require a special school in England, it is likely that he would require an EHC assessment, because generally statutory assessment is a prerequisite for admission in England, and we know that that doesn't happen quickly. So CEAS can engage with the new local authority and explain the scenario and try and ask them to consider the child's previous chapter in his journey and what he will require in the new location. There have been times where local authorities have agreed that based on the young person's current educational offering, that they can have an EHC assessment place at a specialist provision, and they can access that specialist provision whilst an assessment is taking place. Which is great, because it doesn't leave a gap in the child's education. But there have also been times where there's been a refusal to do so, and a young person has actually been sat out of school or college for a significant period of time following posting. The best case scenario for us is that a child has as seamless a transfer as possible, and we work with the family to see if we can do anything around the timing of posting. So if the airman was due to move before John completed qualifications, we would support the family and recommend that the family retain within Scotland until the qualifications are complete, so John can arrive in England with a body of accredited qualifications. So for looking over what the main agents within this can do, you know, we can acknowledge John has very little control. Parents are very anxious and are furiously trying to gather information to make decisions. You know, we're looking for local authority to acknowledge the child's previous stage and to try as far as possible to meet the need upon arrival. And that leaves the school who often, you know, pick up the pieces because the child arrives, and we're aware of that. But again, acknowledging John's journey, accepting his qualifications from within the Scottish setting. Often we hear families say, well, the new school or college says that they have to do GCSEs now because they don't know what nationals are. So it's just thinking about the reception that families have when they contact you and so on. I'm going to have a look at Leo, slightly different scenario, but no less common. So Leo is in year 4. He's in an MOD school in Cyprus. Leo has speech and language difficulties and some social emotional difficulties. Leo's mother is in the army and is due to return to the UK at the start of the new academic year. If just in case you're not aware, MOD schools, wherever they may be in the world, as far as reasonably practicable, will mirror the English curriculum. So there will be some curricular familiarity between the two systems for Leo. Leo currently has a scan within his MOD school, which is the Service Children's Assessment of Need, and his current provision has been informed by an educational psychologist and a speech and language therapist. A scan is a document that shows the highest level of need within the MOD school's graduated response to need. Within the provision, Leo has high levels of one-to-one LSA support and a personalised curriculum for literacy and numeracy, and he engages in sessions with an ELSA. As a SENCO, seeing this child's package of support land on my desk without a statutory assessment would make me start to wonder how I was going to put this provision together. And again, there are parts that we can all play in trying to support this family to move forward. So again, if we look at Leo's part in all of this, I think we'll kind of agree that Leo, he's a young boy. He has very little influence over the next stage in his education. He's just being told by his parents that he's going. The parents, again, are furiously trying to gather information about where they're going, when they're going to arrive, how they get school places, will that school be able to meet their child's needs, what does that school need to have in place. Often we hear reports from families that they phone SEN teams or they phone schools and they're told, oh, we can't do anything until you're actually in the UK, or we couldn't be able to provide that, wouldn't be able to provide that support, or all our schools are full at the moment. And this causes parents a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry. So if we think about, what can the local authority do in this part? I think, it's pretty safe to see that Leo's going to need a considerable amount of support that is additional to or different from peers. There's a long history base of that, which has been written by professionals into a formal document. Within the SEN Code of Practice, it does ask that local authorities consider the content of the scan, but nowhere is it a statutory duty for the scan to be converted into an EHCP. However, we have seen lots and lots of good practice with local authorities who will utilise the scan information and will agree to assess for an EHC based on the information within the scan, which is a fantastic relief for families. So again, the school in this, acquiring a school place early so that Leo can start understanding where he'll be going to school, that the SENCO in the MOD school can engage with the SENCO in the state school in England, and so there can be a robust transition for this young person, and any interim provision before an EHC can be put in place for a seamless transfer. I will refer to the MOD group later, because the MOD group has actually been really instrumental in engaging with local authorities around scans and moving scans into EHCPs, which we're really grateful to the local authorities for. So what have service families told us about this transition for their children with SEN? And I think I've alluded to it, that often the children and young people have little influence over the planning of their journey, which can be really exciting for them. But I think particularly as children get older, it can be a little bit contentious, which can cause pressure for parents. Parents are often unaware of processes involved in obtaining school places, or how they begin to gain effective provision for their children. It can vary from school to school, from local authority to local authority, and definitely from country to country. Parents often report to us that they feel a lack of control in the process, and they become frustrated when agencies don't understand the implications of a service-related lifestyle. Families quite simply want their children to be included and to belong wherever the military sends them in the next part of their journey. And I think I alluded to it earlier, that first impressions really count for families when they're moving into an area and they have virtually no knowledge of it. Having somebody on the other end of the phone, and understand your situation and offer to help can mean a lot. I've mentioned local authorities and the part they can play quite a lot. I would really like to emphasise the point that in the SEN Code of Practice, section 10.53 onwards refers specifically to the children of service personnel, and it explains explicitly the two main points that we spoke about so far that can increase vulnerabilities. So we've got the service-induced mobility, and we've got the deployment of serving parents, so parental separation. Also within that section, you will note that if a child is undergoing a statutory assessment, that it is a duty that local authorities must contact CEAS, because CEAS actually have an input into the assessment process. There are times where we are unaware of the child, but it also gives us an opportunity then to ask them to signpost the family back to CEAS so we can support should we need to. If I could make a plea to any of you working with service children with SEN, it's that you look at this small section within the Code of Practice, because there's lots of musts, shoulds and coulds in there that would make the life for children and young people a little bit easier. Schools, I'm going to say from the outset that I know there is so much good practice in schools across the country, and also within MOD schools, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of service children and young people who make with SEN who make transitions on a yearly basis, and everything runs absolutely smoothly for them. But if I was going to make a couple of pleas, I was going, it would be to acknowledge that service children are not an homogenous group. Don't assume that, we're all the same and that we've all, I'm an army wife, I have a small child. We all come from different backgrounds, different religions, different cultures, different, we're just not one group. So we don't all experience life the same, nor are life experiences the same. Give service children opportunities to talk about their experiences and opportunities to be listened to. I know I'm preaching to the converted when I say this, to make use of the Thriving Lives toolkit. It's a really good audit tool, particularly for communication with senior leaders in school if you need to. Again, it can be helpful for you to influence how service pupil premium is spent. Also, service children themselves say a lot that planning for transitions is important. Welcomes and goodbyes mark the beginning and ends of chapters for our children and families. Please, this is a plea, if you know that you have families who are going to struggle with transition and they have children with SEN or without, please signpost service families to CEAS, because we will be available to support. And that leads me on to how we can help. So we predominantly work directly with families. We can engage with schools if parents want us to and give us consent to do so, but everything we do is shared with families. So we can help with school admissions, school appeals. We work with local authorities around statutory assessments or school admissions. We help to explain statutory duties and timescales to families. We basically help families to navigate the system, whatever the system looks like. We can, again, with consent, work with a chain of command to try and explain the impact, the educational implications of the needs of the service on children and young people. So we could recommend an early posting, say before the start of GCSE courses, or to retain within an area until courses are complete or statutory assessment is complete. And then we can support parents, around the statutory assessment process and what their rights are and what the responsibilities of other people in their children's lives may be. So that's kind of the operational, the nitty-gritty part of our cases and what CEAS does, and kind of holding that together in the overarching key strategic interventions, really. There's lots going on behind the scenes, and namely is the MOD group, which I spoke about earlier, which is the Ministry of Defence Local Authority Partnership. which my colleague Ed Harris facilitates. So there are 15 English local authorities with the highest numbers of service children who volunteer to be within this working group. They've committed to work together to improve the experiences and outcomes of service children. Lots of good practice shared, lots of communication around opportunities for local authorities. But for this presentation, I think one of the main elements is that they've co-produced and formally adopted an agreed set of principles for the transition of Armed Forces children with SEN. And within that is a lot of information about receiving in statutory assessments, acknowledging the previous stages in a child's education, children moving with scans from MOD schools. If your local authority is part of this group, there will be a copy of this document around. If anybody would like to see it, I can share it with you. And which leads me on to the next point. I will shortly be beginning an SEN MOD lab group. Again, voluntary membership. You can join should you want to, and it's more about what we can do on the ground to support local authorities to meet the agreed principles within the document. And the SEN Code of Practice is due for a redraft, and I'm sincerely hoping that membership of the SEN MOD Lab will be able to work together to make recommendations for changes within the Code of Practice for service children and young people. And that's it from me. If you have any questions, please do contact CEAS, or if you feel we can help yourselves or your school in any way, or any families, please do signpost them to us. Thank you.